we should be live in about a minute. For those here, I'm so glad that we've all managed to reincarnate into our December forms. I'll be sending out invitations to become a panelist that will merely reincarnate you into the room, and I'll stop making the little jokes. But you'll be able to share your video if you wish. You'll be able to mute and unmute yourself when we have opportunities for participation. Otherwise, you're of course welcome to use the chat, and I will give the rest of the little spiel right about now, as we are live on Facebook. So those on Facebook, welcome, good evening. This is our ongoing series with Dr. Nathaniel Berman on resurrection and reincarnation. We are up to the reincarnation part of the course, but they are related. So as usual, you can always catch up with the recordings, but you're welcome to jump in now and get started with us fresh and new. So again, those joining us on Zoom, I will send you an invitation to become a panelist that will let you into the room, let you share your camera, let you mute and unmute yourself when we have opportunities for participation. If you are not intending to share your audio, please do stay muted at that point. Otherwise, feel free to use the chat here on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can put your questions and comments in the comment section directly below this video. I'll take a peek now and then so that you can be part of the conversation too. Without further ado, Dr. Berman, please.
Okay, good evening, everybody. We are in the fifth session of this course, and we are in the second session of the section on, for want of a better word in English, reincarnation, although there are some better words. And the theme of this course throughout is, what would it be like to live with a consciousness of these rather mysterious ideas, or there were mysterious visions? What would it be like to live with it, live with a consciousness of it? And that's everything I've done so far has been directed towards that goal of trying to imagine what it'd be like to live with a consciousness of this sort of thing. I wrote on my Facebook page the other day that I was writing about gilgul, and an old friend of mine, very old friend of mine, wrote something about, surely there's an advantage to also living rationally, something like that. I'm not doing him justice. And this is an old friend of mine, is Orthodox and very observant Jew and very learned. And I thought, what does that mean rationally? What does rationally mean exactly? And what does that kind of comment mean from someone who definitely believes in God and Torah and everything? What are the bounds of rationality? What do we accept, rational and irrational? I mean, even for those of you who don't believe in God or aren't religious, what is, examine your lives for things that you accept that you don't have rational proof for, that you experience. And those are all things to think about. Okay, so tonight we are going to do something very special that is very much about an experience, or something that I think can be experienced. And we're going to look at it through a very traditional text. And this is the idea of what I called in the course description spirit guides, or what is called, as we will see, in kabbalistic language, ibbur, or pregnancy. Where you become pregnant with the soul of someone else during your lifetime. Okay. And this is a form of gilgul, a form of reincarnation, for want of a better word, because it usually involves the soul of a person who has died coming into the body during your lifetime, rather than gilgul, sort of the normal case of gilgul, in which you're born with this soul of that has been here before. Okay, we're going to go through this in some detail. We're going to work through a text by Chaim Vital, who was the main exponent of Lurianic Kabbalah. And it's a repetitious text. And as I was putting it together, I thought, I'm going to leave in the repetitions, or at least some of the repetitions, because he's repeating himself for a reason. I think he's repeating himself. Sometimes people just repeat themselves, because they repeat themselves, but sometimes texts they repeat themselves when they really want you to understand it, or they feel like it's not comprehensible, or on the first try. And this is a very repetitious chapter in this book. The book is called Shar HaGilgulim, or which is sometimes translated as the gate of reincarnations. I like to translate it as the gate of revolutions, as I said last time. Gilgulim literally means revolutions. Someone put in the chat, is this the same as a dibbuk? And that's a very good question. And the answer is, a dibbuk that's kind of a famous thing, in part because of a play written in the beginning of the 20th century. And it's basically usually a hostile or malevolent or tortured soul that comes into the body of somebody and possesses that person. It's often referred to as demonic possession. It turns out the word dibbuk doesn't appear in these older texts. It's a relatively, in Jewish terms, relatively recent term. And there is descriptions of that in Lurianic, in the classic period of Lurianic Kabbalah in the 16th century, without using that word. But equally, or actually even more, of Chaim Vital's writings are devoted to the good side of that, where there's a spirit guide, where you get possessed, or at least you invite in, you become pregnant with the soul of a spirit guide, of someone who is going to help you on your path. Okay, so that's what we're going to do tonight. And I really feel like this is something that one could try at home, or at least one could hope to try it at home, even though it's clear from the text that a lot of the details were only transmitted orally. And we'll see where that might come in. Okay, so tonight, right, a couple of slides with glossary that are really important. It's really important to understand that in Kabbalah, from the beginning, and then it gets more complicated as things go on, there isn't just one soul. There are a number of soul levels, as they're called in the Zohar. And there are three principal ones. There's actually another two, but for our purposes, these are the main ones to remember. The nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. And they're impossible actually to translate. The translations are very rough because really they're synonyms if you look in the dictionary, but this is sort of helps understand what they're about, although not really. I usually leave them transliterated. So there's the nefesh, which I call the vital force. It's in part because it's shared with animals. Animals have a nefesh in Kabbalah. So it's the lowest level, the soul, it's the most bound up with the body. Then there's the ruach, spirit, and the neshama, or soul. There is no overarching term, interestingly enough, and a person's soul is really composed of a convergence of these three, and they separate at death. And there's a lot more to say about them, but this is the main thing to know: nefesh, ruach, neshama. And also, it's very important to know that you're born with a nefesh, but you have to achieve a ruach, and you have to achieve a neshama. It's not taken for granted. It's something that you have to achieve over the course of your life. Okay, and if you don't achieve it in this Kabbalistic vision that we're going to be talking about, you have to go through gilgul. Okay. By the way, the plurals are nefashot, plural of nefesh, ruchot, plural of ruach, neshamot, plural of neshama. Does anybody have any questions just about that? Just the basics. No deep questions. Just the basic glossary point. Everybody get that? Okay. Okay, now, two more words. I already mentioned gilgul, which is revolution, often translated as reincarnation, but doesn't actually mean reincarnation, literally. It really literally means revolving, cycling. It's the same word as galgal for wheel. And ibbur, which is pregnancy. Now, the word ibbur was used in the earlier phase of Kabbalah as a synonym for gilgul, but in Lurianic Kabbalah in the 16th century, it came to take this special meaning, this specific meaning. that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, here we go. Here we go. This is from Chaim Vital, the main student of Isaac Luria, or the main redactor of Luria's Kabbalah, the gates of revolutions, or the gate of revolutions, or the gate of reincarnations, translated by somebody named Pinchas Winston, but I've modified the translation in a number of ways. Okay, here we go. A well-known matter, interesting, an interesting gambit that he does in the beginning, a well-known matter, in the words of our rabbis, and that abbreviation is, their memory should be for blessings, the spirits, ruchot, or souls, neshamot, of righteous people, and here they're mostly talking about dead righteous people, although not exclusively, it turns out. The spirits or souls of righteous people come and impregnate a person in the mystery that is called pregnancy, ibbur, to assist him, the person, the living person, in the service of God, may his name be blessed. As it says in the Zohar, regarding the Talmudic dictum, this is a dictum from the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, one who comes to purify himself, they help him. Now in the Talmud, this is a literal translation of the Talmudic dictum. In the Talmud, it doesn't say who the they is. And perhaps a better translation, if not as literal, would be, when it comes to purify himself, he is helped, maybe, but it literally says they help him, misayim lo. The Talmud doesn't, misayim oto, I see, he quotes it as. I think in our edition it says misayim lo. It doesn't say whose they are. It's in the impersonal. And it's a little mysterious. You know, they probably did not have this conception that we're talking about in the Talmud. What they meant by they help him, who was the they, is unclear. But let's see what Chaim Vital says about it. Rabbi Natan said, oh, this is also still in the Talmud, the souls of the righteous come to help him. So they sort of have this idea, but not in the sense of possession or entry into a person. And as it says in the Zohar regarding Rav Hamnuna Saba, that it came to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Abba in the form of a donkey driver. And I gave you there a very cute donkey driver that I found online to give you that sense of an unexpected visitation. Okay, so now I want to say a word about this. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay, so in the Talmud it says they help him, again, without specifying who the they is, although one of the Talmudic sages, the souls of the righteous, unclear exactly what they mean. Certainly in the Talmud, they had the idea that the souls of the righteous could appear to living people. There are many stories like that, usually in a dream. Many stories in the Talmud about the souls of dead righteous people appearing to living people, as I say, usually in a dream. This text is going to take that in a different direction. And I also want to say one more thing about Rav Hamnuna Saba, who appears to these other sages in the form of a donkey driver, is that Rav Hamnuna Saba is like, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the hero of the Zohar. He's the master sage. But Rav Hamnuna Saba, he's even more higher than the Zohar. And it sometimes almost seems to identify him with a divine figure. And Saba, of course, means grandfather or old man, Rav Hamnuna Saba. And the idea that he would appear to them in the form of a donkey driver, okay? And it's unclear exactly what Chaim Vital means here. Because since we're talking about ibbur, he's not talking about the relationship of Rav Hamnuna Saba to Rabbi Shimon or the other sages to whom he appeared. He's talking about his relationship to the donkey driver. That's what he must be talking about, even though that's not the meaning of the Zohar, the plain meaning of the Zoharic passage. Is everybody following me? Okay, let's go on. It'll become clear as we go along. As I said, there's going to be, it's a very repetitious text, and I think for good reason. Okay, so there's the donkey driver. And I believe that what Chaim Vital is saying here is that Rav Hamnuna Saba has gone into the donkey driver in the form of an ibbur. I believe that's what is being said here. Okay, let's go on. It should be known. Okay, now here there's also needs a little explanation. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna wait. Oops. I'm gonna give a little explanation here. Okay, another little explanation. Now I want everybody to focus because I didn't give you the text for this. It's too long for this little piece of it. Everybody focus. Everybody zoom. Actually, let's take a deep breath. Okay. Here's how it goes. In this way, in this vision, this Lurianic vision, 16th century Kabbalah, in the work of Chaim Vital, he says this: you're born with a nefesh, okay? You have to achieve a ruach and a neshama. Sometimes people don't. First, you have to perfect your nefesh. You have to do tikkun on your nefesh, okay? And if you do that, then you can get a ruach. And then you have to do tikkun on your ruach. And if you do that, you can get a neshama, okay? But that can only happen on your first time around. You're not in gilgul, you're a new soul. You're around, first time around. If you're a gilgul, if you've come back because you failed to get from nefesh to ruach on the first time around, then you can only do one level in each lifetime. So if you come back because you've damaged your nefesh in the first lifetime, then when you come back, you can only perfect the nefesh in the next lifetime, and then you have to die and come back, and then you have a lifetime to perfect the ruach, and you have to die and come back, and you have to perfect the ruach to get a neshama. And sometimes it takes more than one lifetime to perfect a certain level. Okay, I know this is complicated, right? But the idea, let me put it in plainer terms, each lifetime you're working on a particular level of your being. Okay, we've had that idea before in the Tikkun HaZohar passage about the body. Right? You're working on a particular level. And here we have three levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama. Right? Unless it's your first time around, you can only do one at a time. Now, or the text we're about to read asks, what if you've come with a nefesh, it's not your first time around, you've done tikkun on your nefesh, you've perfected it, but in this schema, you can't go on to the next level. What should you do? Just stagnate? No. If you can't move forward by yourself, you might be able to get the help of a spirit guide. Okay, one more time. If you can't move on by yourself, because in this vision, you have to work on one level at a time, and you can't get a ruach, a spirit guide comes to help you along, and it plays the role of a ruach to your nefesh, because you can't get your own ruach, so someone else's soul comes in and plays that role. Spirit guide helping you, or let's put it in plainer English, you're stuck. You've gone as far as you can. You need outside resources. That's what this is doing. Okay, now let's see how this works. It should be known, or more literally would be, you must know, you should know, what happens to the nefesh that alone was already rectified without its ruach. The mystery of the matter is that according to the level of refinement and the level of rectification of this nefesh, on that level itself, the nefesh of a righteous person will revolve into the body of this person while he is alive. And this nefesh of a righteous person is one that has already completed his rectification revolutions, having no further need to revolve, will enter. The nefesh of this righteous person will function as a ruach for the nefesh of this living person. Okay, let's pause on that. Let's pause on that for a second, because this is the hardest thing. This is the hardest part. Once if you get this basics, all the rest will follow. You've done tikkun on your nefesh. That the word rectification is a translation of tikkun. You've done tikkun on your nefesh. You can't move forward. You can't move to the next level of getting a ruach. And you could either use this schema because it can only be one each lifetime, or you could just say you're stuck. Then the nefesh of a dead righteous person can come into you and play the role of a ruach for your nefesh, or what I call a spirit guide. It's an outside spirit that will help you move to the next level. Now, you can take this in two ways, or many. You can take this in thousands of ways. Two of the ways to take it are, in the sense of the way it's described. The actual nefesh, soul of a dead righteous person, comes into you to help you along. Okay? I could translate it into less metaphysical or less mythical terms. It would lose for me some of the magic. And just say, look, I don't know what to do. What would my teacher do? What would my dead parent do? How would my mother respond in this situation? How would my 6th grade Gemara teacher, who I really respected tremendously, how would he handle this thing? Can I somehow channel him or get in tune with that way of being in the world? Something that's on the outside of me, especially if it's not a relationship, it feels not a blood relative, it's even more sort of in line with this. Okay, that'd be a way of describing it that wouldn't require any myth. I like the myth, but that would be a way of describing it without the myth. Okay, let's look at this. So the nefesh of the righteous, that's 3 lines. The nefesh of this righteous person, the dead righteous person, will function as a ruach for the nefesh of this living person. In other words, function as a higher level of soul. Now, he says, sometimes it is possible that nefashot of earlier generations will revolve there. Going back to our father Abraham, peace be unto him, or similar souls, presumably great souls. It will be based upon the rectification and refinement of the nefesh of this living person. Now here, I think, is something incredibly intriguing, which is, this is in part about our own spiritual progress, in which you get the assistance of a deceased righteous person. But it's also about something greater than that. And there's something I've also been stressing. There's also something I've been stressing all along, which is it's a collective project. In fact, it's about our relationship to history. If he's saying it can go back and back and back, even as far back as Abraham, which for Jews, I guess, is as far back as you can go and still find a Jew, right? So the idea is it's a connection, it's not simply an egotistical thing about your own progress. It's about a connection to history. And that's also something I've been stressing for the last 4.5 sessions, right? This goes beyond sort of a self-centered spiritual project. It's about connecting to history, right? Okay. Somebody put in the chat is a question of awareness. We'll get to that. We'll get to this question of awareness in a second or in a while. It's a very important question. And I think it's a question that's accompanied with us since the beginning of our course. Okay. This matter of revolving during a lifetime, of gilgul during a lifetime, or it's not from the beginning of a lifetime, but in the middle of a lifetime, is called by the rabbis mystery of the pregnancy, of ibbur. And this is the difference between a regular revolution or reincarnation, gilgul, and pregnancy, ibbur. Okay? That's just the glossary point. Now, here he says something more. Sometimes it is actually possible for a ruach of a righteous person to be an ibbur in a living person. In other words, not just a nefesh. So the first case was a nefesh comes and serves in the place of a ruach to your nefesh. So the nefesh of a dead righteous person comes and plays the role of a guide, of a ruach, to your nefesh. But sometimes if you get further advanced, you might actually be able to get a higher level of a deceased righteous person, a ruach. It can even be from the ruchot of earlier righteous people, including the forefathers. In other words, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, their souls are in Eden, even in our late period in history. I love this line. This is one of my favorite lines in this whole text. Even in our late period in history. In other words, even though it's Chaim Vital's writing in the middle of the 16th century, even in the middle of the 16th century, I can call upon, it's possible that I could connect to Abraham, who lived, depending on your views, in the second millennium BCE, right? I can connect that far back. And when he says this, when he says things like this, it's like, I feel like this is a window into a practice. If he says, even our late period of history, you get the feeling he's done this at home, right? One of the hints here, this is an actual practice that he's engaged in, and the circle is engaged in. And then he says this, which is another window. It all depends upon the level of the mitzvot performed by this living person, because some mitzvot have the inherent ability to draw down the nefesh of a righteous person in the mystery of ibbur, and some mitzvot, higher level, can draw down the ruach of a righteous person. Now, I myself hate to use terms from sort of pop mysticism or pop psychology or pop anything, but nonetheless, right? The word channeling here, I think, is very apt. I'm sure everyone here has this experience with a parent or some kind of relative that all of a sudden you find yourself and you think, I'm talking just like my, name the relative, my father, my dead father, or whoever, right? I'm sure every person has that experience. Many people have this experience. I know that when I sing Zmirot on Friday night, Sabbath table songs, people who knew my father, who died 25 years ago, often say that I'm channeling his voice and his spirit. There was something about the way he sang these songs that I know I inhabit when I sing them. Now, to talk about a relative is one thing, but to do it with someone else, especially someone who you didn't actually know in the flesh, is a whole different level. But I just sort of appeal to that experience that I think many people have. Here, what he's saying is, and again, this is an allusion to a practice. He said some mitzvot can do this, some mitzvot can do that. There's a hint here that there's a practice that was transmitted orally about how to actually induce the spirits of these deceased righteous people into your body through certain kinds of ritual performances. And it really is a window. Kabbalistic texts, famous fact about Kabbalistic texts compared to mystical texts and other traditions is that the practical instructions are rare. They're not unknown, but they're very rare, frustratingly. And a lot of it was transmitted orally. Of course, a lot of it we've lost, or maybe they're being transmitted orally in circles that I'm not admitted to. Okay, let me go on. It is also possible that sometimes it will occur that the nefesh of a righteous person will be an ibbur in him. And after that, he will merit an ibbur of another nefesh from a different righteous person, greater than the first. Thus, now hold on to your hats here, if you're wearing a hat. he will have his own nefesh, and the nefesh of the righteous person who first came to him will serve as a ruach for him. And the second nefesh of the greater righteous person, which came to him last, will be the dimension of neshamot for him. Okay. Now here, this is for advanced players. Okay. Now I know you're all sitting there thinking that you're individuals. You're all in your, on my screen, you're all in your separate boxes. Okay, everybody's in a separate box here. If we were in a room together live, you'd all be sitting in your separate bodies. But once again, we've had this before, once again, we have this idea of what Moshe Idel, the famous scholar of Kabbalah, calls polypsychism, more than one soul in a body. And here it's two spirit guides. So he says explicitly, you have your own nefesh, you have the nefesh of one righteous person, the first one you induced into your body, and the one of another righteous person who you've induced to enter into your body. So if you're working on your nefesh during that lifetime, you've got one soul of righteous person serving as ruach to your nefesh, and one serving as neshama to your nefesh. And there the three of you walking down the street. Now somebody wrote in the chat, I'm generally not checking the chat because I'm focused on teaching, but somebody says, this all sounds a bit frightening. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it really would depend, right? It really would depend. And I think that, I like that comment in the chat, that sounds a bit frightening, because it shows the person whose name is D, a hidden tzaddik, right? It shows that person, whoever that person is engaged in imagining what this would feel like. So I really like that comment, right? Is engaged, and actually when I said it, I saw at least one person on this, when I said that in the chat it says this would be frightening, I saw at least one person on the screen shake their head, which suggests that person also engaged in trying to imagine what it would be like. Or for all I know, has had this experience, right? And I think it could be both. It could be frightening, could be wonderful. I think if you think about descriptions of prophecy, and when a God or angels talk to people in the Tanakh, sometimes it's wonderful, sometimes it's frightening, right? This idea of actually engaging with something greater than yourself can have that double quality to it. Something awesome, that close connection between the words awesome and awful, or in Hebrew, the double meanings of the word norah, which can mean amazing or terrible. Actually, in modern Hebrew, it really has, in modern Israeli Hebrew, it has both of those meanings of something that can be amazing, actually an intensifier. You could say it was amazingly great, kef, a lot of fun, right? Or it could be say, Noah, it was terrible, right? So I think, I like these comments, imagining what this would be like, and maybe you've had this experience. Right? And again, it is beyond the self, right? This is really connecting with others, connecting with knowing that yourself, you didn't invent, you can invent parts of yourself. You didn't choose when to be born, what language to be born into, what country to be born into, what century to be born into. You didn't choose any of that. You could change some of that during your lifetime. Not so much the century as the country or the language. But your starting position is something you haven't chosen, right? And these kinds of ideas, in a way, they're very realistic. They're much more realistic than ego-centered rationalism from the European Enlightenment. Much more realistic. You're born into a cycle. Right? It's actually more truthful. Right? I'm going to share a couple more screens, and I'm going to ask for some questions, because I've already done a lot here. Okay, now sometimes, I like this. Sometimes the nefesh of a person will be rectified so much that he will merit to achieve the nefesh of a particular righteous person. After that, he will actually reach the level of a ruach of a particular righteous person greater than both of them, until it is possible to reach the ruach of our father Abraham, peace be unto him. This is the mystery of what they, Zichronam Levracha, Memories for a Blessing, have written in the Midrashim, and specifically in Midrash Shmuel. There is not a generation in which there is not someone like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Samuel, and so forth. But the pen does not have the power to put all these fine details in a book. Now, when the Midrash says that, it probably means it more literally. Less literally. Probably means it in the sense of there's not a generation in which there aren't people as great as the famous righteous people of past generations. So that's probably what the Midrash means. But Chaim Vital takes that more literally. There is not a generation in which the souls of these deceased righteous person are not present by inhabiting the bodies of people who are currently alive. Okay, I'm going to pause, take a deep breath, and ask for some questions because we've done a lot, and I want to see how it's being heard or received. Anybody?
How is this perhaps, I mean, it's a mystical form of talking about, as opposed to revolution, one's own personal evolution, and yes, taking on, in whatever mystical form, a channeling, I like the term channeling, important characters that one has studied, that one becomes suffused with, and one, in fact, even takes on their characteristics, so that without it having to be literal, but rather in internalization of different stages. And sometimes you get stuck, and sometimes you need the help of a particular sefer or a particular memory or a particular, teacher, and you evolve.
I that was beautifully said, and I say that I like the translation revolution because it actually is the literal translation. Also because it was used in the famous Latin translation of various works of Kabbalah in the 17th century. It translated as Kabbalah denudata, Kabbalah revealed, and this work was translated. Maybe it was the Sefer Gilgulei was translated, and they used that actual term in Latin, the revolution of souls. But also because what I like about this, about all of this, in part, is it unseats the centrality of the self, right? So it's also what I said at last class, I think, that reincarnation always suggests a very self-centered quest. I was the Queen of England in a past life, something like that. This really unseats that idea that it's all about the self. It's all about me, all about you, right? It's not all about me. It's not all about you. It's about connecting to all of history, going back to Abraham, right? That would be in its ultimate extent. It's about situating oneself in history, right? And seeing oneself as a product and as living with history. Or in a more microcosmic way, it is about awareness that you're not mastery of the self is not the master, right? And certainly all God-centered religions teach that. And this really situates yourself in relationship to other souls. And I really like that part, and I think the word revolution, because of its political meaning, has that sense of destabilization. I really think these are very destabilizing visions.
Yeah.
They're really about unseating that self-certainty or the certain kind of smugness that has been encouraged in the West since Descartes, a certain kind of I am, I think, therefore I am, right? That dictum from Descartes has no place in this kind of vision. Beth?
Yeah, one of the things that popped into my mind, especially when you talked about there possibly being more than one ibbur at a time in a given individual, it reminded me of the cases of that have occurred of people with multiple personalities. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but supposedly there's something about how the person fractures and these different personalities are intended as protectors. And we all have internal protectors of one sort or another that we develop during our childhood. But then with linking these, I was almost going to say interlopers, but helpers, let's say, call them helpers, not interlopers. And linking the idea that somehow this person has performed mitzvot that merit their presence, I'm almost wondering if it wouldn't be more the other way around, that these people need help so desperately that the righteous must show up to help them out of the jam that they're in. And that's what the tzaddikim would just naturally want to do with all this, apparently excess righteousness that they've managed to accumulate during their own gilgulim.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. That is beautifully said. Beautifully said. So let me address the multiple personality thing. Multiple personality disorder is a problem because people suffer from it, right? I mean, we all have different facets to our personality, right? If anybody here speaks more than one language, which I assume many people do, or at least speak another language at least a little bit, I think almost everyone has the experience that there are when you speak a language well, relatively well, I think almost everyone has the experience that they're a slightly different person when they speak a different language. I think almost everybody has that experience. Again, you have to speak language fairly, so you're not actually translating, you're actually speaking the language, you're not just translating from English. So I think that the idea that people have different facets of the personality, people are different at work than they are at home, they're different with their children, they are with their spouse, they're different, and so forth, right? I think everybody has that experience. Multiple personality disorder is a problem because it's a disorder, because people are suffering from it. And the thing that is most like that is the evil spirits or the tormenting spirits, the malevolent spirits. That it really could be translated into those kind of clinical terms. And there certainly are those descriptions, a lot of them, in 16th century texts. This guy named Yossi Chayes wrote a whole book about exorcisms of the 16th century. On your second point, yeah, I mean, I was trying to capture that a little bit with my idea that you're stuck, that there's a stuckness. It is certainly true that in this text, getting one of these spirit guides is really something that you achieve through a merit. And I haven't yet come upon what you're describing, right? Although what you described is quite beautiful, and one would hope to find. I have not yet found it in these traditional texts. In the Jewish tradition, it's more, somebody's in desperate straits, so they'll get a visitation from Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, or something like that. That's more the form that takes. And maybe some of us had the experience of being in some kind of desperate situation. Somebody gratuitously helps us, and you think, wow, who was that person? And then they disappear. I mean, I know I've had that experience and whatever. Yeah.
What a journey, huh? Well, I have an idea. It's a way of looking at this. Instead of making ruach plural, let's leave it as ruach. and say that these influences, these beings who existed, continue to exist on an ethereal level. And we don't always perceive them, but at times, either we are open to them and we open ourselves, or Hashem opens us to them, and then we experience them, and they provide their light and their Ezra for us, their strength for us. So I'm thinking that rather than for me to try and grasp all of this, because it's so challenging, it's the way I can look at it is in rather than Eliyahu HaNavi having a spirit that he takes with him when he never died, I guess. So he just took with him wherever he went in his fiery chariot. And then he shares that with me when I need it. Rather than that, I'd rather have it that it's still here, almost transparent, and that I can open up to that or be opened up to that, and it sort of seeps into me. And what's so delightfully challenging about this topic that you brought up is these levels of, at times, we don't have that membrane that defines us as an individual. We actually, that's pretty unrealistic. We are all of those. We are our history. We are our heritage. And yes, I'm Yael, but that's only for functioning on the the chessboard.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I wanted the number of things I wanted to say. I mean, you know, for something I wanted, it's not directly related to what you just said, but it just occurred to me while you're talking, is just to mention that I've actually written this piece in which I compared this book, some of the descriptions of the internalization of these spirits from without, to Freud's theories of introjection. You know, love Freud or hate Freud, I mean, Freud is, you know, a secular thinker, right? And he also was very much engaged in the unseating of the pretensions of the self to mastery, and showing how the self is really, you know, somebody describes the ego as sort of like this little superficial layer on top of the seething cauldron of the id, right? And he's and he talks about a Copernican revolution of, like, you know, instead of the, Copernicus, instead of the Earth going, you know, the Earth being the center of everything, it turns out the Earth is just one thing that's going around the sun. So I tried to, and there were a lot of uncanny resemblances, and it also relates to the multiple personality thing. Freud also talks about introjections being at war. Sometimes they can be at war with each other, and then the patient really suffers. And that there are certain equivalents to that in this book by Chaim Vital, right? And I think this experience of yourself being situated in relationship to others inside of you is a deep experience that goes back. You can find, you know, various expressions of this going way back. Talking about a muse. Right? What is a muse? A muse is some kind of inspiration, a personified inspiration that poets call upon, and that goes back to, you know, the ancient Greeks in the 6th century BC or whatever. This idea of a muse, this idea of an inspiration from without, right? The Iliad starts off, "Sing, O goddess," right? The anger of Achilles. And this really takes it seriously, right? And I know we moderns are reluctant to take anything of these things literally, and I'm not pushing that. But to really experience the unseating of the self has a certain kind of mythical quality to it that Freud also recognized. All right, I'm gonna go on a little bit. To see times are running. Not that I, need to get all my slides out, but let's see what else I have here. I love this line, but the pen does not have the power to put all these fine details in the book. At various times he says, I can't go further with this. And it's clear there's a reference to some kind of oral teaching. Now he's talking about what if you've already achieved the ruach and you're working in a lifetime, you have your nefesh, you have your ruach. When a nefesh and a ruach revolve together and have been rectified, we're unable to require their neshama until another revolution, until another lifetime. Then a nefesh, ruach, or neshama of a particular righteous person can enter with them and serve as the dimension of neshama for them. So that's sort of a corollary of what we've done so far. It also occurs sometimes that after his three parts have revolved together, so you've achieved all three levels, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and all of them have been rectified, then what are you supposed to do? You're stuck again. You can't go further. You've done it all. Then a nefesh or ruach of a righteous person will then become an ibbur within him. When he dies, he will be able to ascend according to the level of this righteous person that was an ibbur in him. And there in the world to come, they will both be at the same height and the same level. Okay, now what's going on here? Again, it's the idea that you're never done, right? And this is maybe this is all religious conceptions. I know it's very characteristic of kabbalistic texts. There's no smugness. There's no, I've done it all. I've achieved it. There's always going further. So he says, what if you've got your nefesh, you got your ruach, neshama, you've done as much tikkun as you will ever be able to do? It's still you're able to go higher. In other words, the idea of is you should always be striving to be in relationship to something greater. Whether it's you're advancing from your nefesh, ruach, to neshama, whether it's acquiring your spirit guide, or whether here's you've done all the work to help you further, you've done all the work further. Well, no. You can still go higher, maybe not on your own merit, but by being in relationship to something higher than you. And I think that's also a very beautiful teaching. Let me go on, because there's something else I want to get to. Before I take more questions. Oh, this is just a gloss on that. This is a line from the Zohar. This is a mystery. It was written in the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai fell on his face and he saw Rav Hamnuna Saba. He said that in that world, in other words, in the world to come, they would recline together. They'd be, this is an image obviously drawn from Greek banquets of the righteous reclining. Oh, I wrote reline. Oops, that's a typo. That of the righteous reclining on couches in the world to come. Both he and Rav Hamnuna Saba. And this must suffice on this topic. This is enough. Again, he reaches some point where he doesn't want to say more. Sometimes because I think it's an oral tradition that he doesn't want to reveal in print. Sometimes it's because it comes close to his own personal preoccupations. And I suspect that he sees in this an image of his relationship to his teacher, Isaac Luria. Okay, this is actually the last slide. I have no other questions. And he says, why does it happen? This matter of ibbur, and there's something really interesting and unexpected here. This matter of ibbur occurs for two reasons. The first is, as a result of the ibbur of the righteous soul in this person, the nefesh of this person will be rectified and refined, corresponding or, according to the level of the nefesh of the righteous person. As a result, he, the currently living person, will be able to ascend in the world to come to the level of the height of the righteous person, since this righteous person helped and assisted him to add mitzvot and additional holiness. And now here's the unexpected part. Another second reason is that it is for the benefit of the righteous person himself, the dead righteous person, the ibbur himself. Since he, the living person, helps to add mitzvot and the rectification. No, since the ibbur, the dead righteous person helps the mitzvot in the rectification, he will receive a portion in them in the world to come. In other words, that even after you're dead, it's possible to get mitzvot. How? By going in ibbur into a living person and getting more merits and then getting a higher reward in the world to come. This is the mystery of what they, the Talmudic sages, Zichronam Lebracha, memory for blessing, wrote, great are righteous people because even in death, they merit children. They have the privilege of getting children. Now, the reason I didn't put a citation here is because he quotes this as though it is a quote from the Talmud, but this is not found in the Talmud. This is something he either made up or quoted from memory, but that phrase is not found in the Talmud. Okay, by causing the person to merit, in other words, the dead righteous person who comes in ibbur, he becomes like a father who guides and assists and himself acquires merits for this reason. However, if this living person regresses from what he had rectified for good, then the righteous soul will separate from him and leave him. The reason for this is that the mystery of ibbur is that it occurs during the life of a person, and it does not cleave to the body of the person like the nefesh of the person himself, with which he revolves and which enters him at birth. This nefesh, in other words, the nefesh you have from birth, is connected and clings there with a profound clinging and is not able to leave there until the day of death. This is unlike the nefesh of the righteous person that enters in the mystery of ibbur, because it enters willingly and leaves willingly. Okay, now this is like undermining those who want to interpret this psychologically. It turns out the soul of the ibbur, the soul of the dead righteous person, has their own agency. If the person continues to act righteously, the righteous soul will remain his neighbor, in quotation marks, referring to some other text. It will remain there until this person dies, when the two of them ascend together to the same level. Right? Okay. So here, and I wanted to get to that, because here there's an attribution of agency to the spirit guide, to the ibbur himself. Right. And I think that attribution of agency, I really want to get to that because it's an indication that to inhabit this vision, really, you don't have to go this far. I think it can give people things without going this far. But if you get this far, you have to leave the psychological explanation behind. And you have to imagine the experience really of being inhabited by a soul that's other than you, because that soul actually has agency. Now, I could even imagine interpreting it psychologically and saying, yeah, okay, I'm trying to channel, what would my father do? And so I really try to get into it, really try to imagine him. And then if I stop the strength of my imagination weakens, it can leave me, and I can no longer get in touch with that. So I could imagine even that I can interpret psychologically. But certainly here in these last few slides, there's a sense of really trying to experience the sort of decentering of your own ego in relationship to the past, maybe even very, very far in the past, and trying to find support there. Okay, it's 9:01, and I know that I had a slow start because of that technological difficulty. So let's take a deep breath and see if people have questions. And I'm willing to stay on the screen for as long as Trisha keeps the window open. But I'd love to hear some more of your wonderful comments and questions.
I have a question. Of course, I want to know how can I invite that spirit guide in? And what occurs to me, maybe because we're in these weeks in the Parsha about Jacob and his dreams, is the dream state in some way a way that one could connect to these these dead righteous nephesh, or the other parts? It doesn't seem like it's talking about dreams at all, but I keep on thinking that somehow that's when you could access these other figures, spirit guides during dreams. Is there anywhere where that's discussed?
Well, I mean, certainly, I mean, dreams, the Talmud is filled with stories of dead people coming to visit people in dreams. That's for sure. And even in the Tanakh, we have that. And I think that in a way, it's appealing to us as moderns to go to dreams, because dreams are clearly a place where our rational self is, we're not in control. Our ego isn't in control. We're not having a rational self, unless, some people, maybe they can do lucid dreaming. Mostly it's this magical part of our lives. And I think that going to dreams is a sort of a modern way of getting in touch with something greater, something other than the rational self that's master in its own house. As you say, this really conception is really not talking about dreams. It's really talking about something else. It hints at orally transmitted practices of attempting to induce. It refers to specific mitzvot that are connected to inducing certain kinds of spirit guides. And again, I in my very banal example, that when I sing those songs on Friday night at the table, it's this uncanny thing of feeling inhabited by my Father. It really is quite uncanny. Now, that's a relatively banal, familiar example, but it's an example, right, of things that people do where they actually have this experience. And however you want to interpret that experience, you can interpret it as a psychological thing, whatever. This is a certain kind of interpretation of it. It does seem to be a connection oral practice. If we were sitting in a room together, rather than talking to each other on the screen, and we had more than 6 sessions, I would, implement a set of practices to try to have people get these experiences. So writing practices is one way to do it. Dreaming could be another way of doing it. It could be, and it would have to be very sort of custom tailored to the person, right? So let's say I was in my class, and I raised my hand, I said, teacher, I have this experience when I'm singing. You could imagine a teacher giving a set of practices, a set of exercises to try to consciously induce it, to induce different kinds of being inhabited through different kinds of singing. For other people, it's writing. For some people, could be all kinds of things. Playing an instrument. Basically, name the human activity, and some people have that experience with various kinds of human activities, whatever it is. So, as I say, if we were sort of a community, let's say we were not a 6-session class on Zoom, but let's say we all went out to the country for a couple of weeks and had a retreat, we would figure out practices for each person to try to induce these kinds of experiences. And I encourage you to try this at home. Other comments?
Yeah, pursuant to what you just said about the teacher would come up with a practice for you with regard to the way you're channeling your father. Are there any other texts from the same time as Chaim Vital which also hint at these same ibburim? Do we have other texts that tell us about these righteous souls inhabiting us?
Well, okay, so from this period, his writings are the main source.
Okay.
It is certainly the case that the sinister side of it, the evil spirits, that was a thing that was going on. He did exorcisms, other people did exorcisms at the time. As say, Yossi Chayes wrote this great book about it. It then becomes a standard language to talk about these things. So this idea of good and bad, he didn't talk about dibuk, that's a very late word, but he talked about a good and bad ibbur. That becomes a standard. And the folk traditions about dibuk are tributary of this, this moment of thinking. Well, something I would mention here that isn't quite an ibbur, it's a magid, right? Which is, it's different in the sense that it's not the sense of internalizing it, it's something that speaks to you from without. But the practice of the experience of having a magid is something about which we also have things at this time. Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was this really interesting character who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the great, this what became the canonical codification of Jewish law, also was a Kabbalist. He was in Tzfat at the same time as Chaim Vital and Isaac Lurie and all those people. And he wrote a mystical, diary, one could say, Magid Mesharim. And Magid Mesharim is the name of the book. Magid Mesharim means someone who speaks correctly or speaks righteously, right? But the word Magid, right, then becomes this idea of a spirit who's speaking to you. And Rabbi Yosef Karo describes a practice of repeating a Mishnah like a chant. Like a Mishnah is a particular piece of Jewish law, right? Like a paragraph from a legal code. Most Mishnahs are. Some are moral things, but mostly it's law. And he says, just you want to be in touch with such and such a rabbi from the Talmudic era. Repeat the Mishnah again and again and again and again, right? It really is an incantation, so that the Mishnah becomes an incantation. Yeah. And if you do it properly and you can see all these instructions, the rabbi of that Mishnah will start speaking to you. He went a higher level, actually. He had his Magid was actually a personification of the Mishnah as such, and it was a female persona. And was really identified with the Shekhinah. So he had routine visitations from the Mishnah, not a Mishnah, but the Mishnah, in the form of this female Magid who was really the Shekhinah. And his book Magid Mesharim was basically about this relationship that he had to this female guide, who was the spirit of the Mishnah. And so as I say, he gives this practice. Now it's a slightly different thing than the ibbur because it is from without rather than speaking from within. Somebody asked before in the chat, I think, about the consciousness of this, right? And this is something that's come up from the beginning of this course, right? Can you be conscious? What is the consciousness dimension here, right? And I think that part of the reason for writing this book on his part and for having these practices is, in a way, is to enable people to achieve consciousness of it, right? The Zohar is drawing on a dictum from Talmud. The Zohar constantly is saying, people have their eyes closed and their ears closed. They don't even understand what they're standing on and what's surrounding them and the ways of God and, the teeming spirits everywhere. The Zohar is clearly, and they repeat it again and again and again in many, many different contexts. It's clear that the writers of the Zohar wanted to induce a state of consciousness in which you would be aware of things that one is not aware of in their everyday life. And I think that to write a book like this, which goes on at great length and unbelievably Baroque detail, you think I gave you a lot of Baroque detail tonight? Nothing. I mean, this book is incredibly, the detail is just, it's a hard book to study. I think that part of the point of all the Baroque detail is to induce this consciousness. is by meditating on the detail and really trying to work it out, is trying to induce a state of consciousness in which you could become aware of these things. Right? And I think it's especially important for us in the post-Enlightenment era, the post-Cartesian era, in which we're so used to thinking of ourselves as this, the ego, a master in its house, right? And thinking of any sort of heterogeneity in your consciousness as pathology, right? And I think this really induces a different kind of mind-expanding experience to try to achieve consciousness of it.
I'd like to share that a number of years back, I studied with a woman, Rabbi Shefa Gold, who's part of this whole Jewish renewal. And there are things about Jewish renewal.
She's not just a part of it, she's a leader. She's a respected leader, highly respected leader.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because chants that she has developed will take a little chunk of liturgy or a little chunk of Tanakh, and then she'll lead people in singing that little chunk over and over and over and over. And I've done it with her in a group, and I've also done it by myself, and especially doing it in a group, it's transporting. And I belong to a conservative shul, so for me, I kind of want the whole liturgy, not just little snippets. But I have to admit that this is a very spiritually stimulating practice to undergo. I definitely have felt more of a connection with the divine and other Jews around me when doing this. It's really kind of amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for people who are, who just go to a traditional synagogue, or let's say traditional Orthodox synagogue, for example, the time when people have that experience is at the end of Yom Kippur, when you recite Hashem Hu Elohim 7 times, and people, at least every place I've ever been, do it loudly. They declaim it, and of course you haven't eaten for 25 hours, and you're declaiming these 3 words 7 times in a row. It really is, I mean, from childhood, and unto this very day, it's like really this climactic moment that, in the traditional liturgy, they have that. And, there are many piyutim, liturgical poems written, especially in the Talmudic era, but in the school of mysticism at that time, the Hechalot or Merkabah mystics, that have a repetitious quality to them, and also sort of trance-inducing things. The thing I like about the Rabbi Yosef Karo story is that I grew up not studying Kabbalah, studying Gemara, studying law, and the idea that he, the author of the code of Jewish law, turned the recitation of chunks of law into a mystical practice to have a vision of a Magid, that just delighted me no end. So I'm really, as I'm speaking here, I really do wish that. Well, anyway, comments in this class have been so good. I really feel like we all need now to go away for 2 weeks together and work on having ibburim, right? And it would have to be done because of what people said about multiple harsa. I think, and people said about frightening. I think those are real dangers, and all mystics and certainly Kabbalists often talk about dangers, right? And I think they are real dangers. So I think that it's something that needs to be done. I think that's also why there's an emphasis on having a teacher, and doing it in a safe way is also, I think, really important.
I guess I struggle with how literal to take this versus how literarily to take this. And being a biologist, I think of it as a we're all semi-permeable membranes as a metaphor.
I love that.
And I actually studied Magid Mesharim and thought it was quite interesting on many levels. But he incorporated Mishnah to the point where it was part of him, and there was a flow. There was a sense of the repetition of the words evoked that connection. So again, I have great difficulty with this all from a literal point of view, as opposed to as metaphors of some kind of experience of a maintaining one's boundaries, but allowing oneself to have a constant semi-permeable flow in and out, including when one studies a particular whatever text, that it then becomes literally ibbur, it becomes incorporated, and then you make it into something new, you deliver it into a new form. So I think it's a wonderful language to use as a process. I wouldn't know how much it's literal.
That's beautiful, Chaim. I really love that you said that. I love your pun on the literal and the literary. That's beautiful, right? It's good as we're coming to the end of time. I think it's just beautiful to think about how those are often thought of as opposites, the literal and the literary, and yet obviously they come from the same root. They have to do with the letter, right? And certainly in Kabbalah, we know that in a way it's as far from pshat, from the plain literal meaning as you can imagine. On the other hand, it's all about the letters and meditation on letters and the mysteries of the letters. The attention to the letter is so important. The literal and the literary, that's a really beautiful, sort of mnemonic, right? We're operating between the literal and the literary, right? And to try to understand. The one more thing I would just want to say before things end is I did want to draw attention to the gender dimension of this, right? And we're talking about basically becoming impregnated with a soul, right? I mean, maybe it's in a way this should be obvious in a way, or maybe it's too obvious even to comment on, right? But nonetheless, right? These books are mostly kabbalistic books until last few decades, mostly written by men for men, really having in mind mostly men, and yet there's a certain, especially in the work of Chaim Vital, a lot of gender bending in a lot of different ways, not only here but in a lot of other places, right? And this idea of this image of the person who wants to progress spiritually as wanting to become pregnant, right, with another being, right? And the use of the term ibbur is not accidental, right? Now, I myself have never been pregnant, literally, right? But I imagine that some people on the screen have been. I actually have another being inside of you, right? So I think the word pregnancy here is not chosen randomly, right? Because it's an actual undeniable experience that human beings have the capability of having another human being inside of them. Again, I will never have that experience myself, but as I say, those who have had that experience or intending to have that experience, it's quite an astonishing thing. And that's really what's being gotten at here. And the other gender thing I would say is that often in the Cartesian world, the world of I think therefore I am, the world in which self-mastery is the goal, that's often a very masculine it's often a very masculinized project, right? The self is master in his own house, where, the man is, king of the castle, right? And the unseating of that mastery is often viewed in gendered terms. There's a feminist philosopher, I'm not sure if she's still alive, named Iris Marion Young, who's written about the pregnant self as an alternative to the Cartesian self, and in very, very interesting terms. And her work comes up for me a lot when I think about ibbur. How are we doing, Noah? Can we stay for a couple more minutes, or?
If people have anything left in them, feel free to get it out.
Chaim, did you want to say something, or are you waving goodbye? What?
I'm waving goodbye because I have
Okay.
to go.
All right.
But my membranes are occluding.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you for the wonderful comments, and thank you for being here. And I hope to see you next week, which is tragically our last session, but I will try to make it worthwhile. So have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, as always, Dr. Berman, and everyone for your participation. Always just such a wonderful class, such a wonderful group. A few little shout outs, I'll just talk about pregnancy. Tomorrow night, we continue our class with Ravanit Sarna on feeding babies. So what do you do with all those beings that one becomes pregnant with? I don't know how to translate that back into this class, but we'll see. Be well.